Solo queue Trials is here, and yeah, you can load into Trials as a solo player. Even though you may have the chance of matching teams, you still are able to play by yourself with randomly matched opponents and teammates to try and go flawless or just get some good loot. Better yet, you can try and play and improve in a little bit more of a meaningful scenario. I find a lot of solo players ask me, what's your best tips or your best advice for people that play solo that don't have people readily accessible to play with? So in this video, I'm going to talk about all the best points I can offer to if you are a solo queuer and you're looking to go flawless in Trials. Rule number 1 is to master versatility. I think you should be focusing on your ability to play any role or bring any loadout that you think is going to fit your team after, of course, you can inspect them, or maybe a loadout that'll counter the opponents and understand how to read the meta well. But not only that, as a player in the game, be ready to play any position in any scenario on the fly. I think it's the most valuable thing that you can get out of solo queue. Of course, when you're playing solo, you're not going to get the consistency that you would with a dedicated team or a group of players that you play with often, which in my opinion, that is the best way to improve. But again, that doesn't mean you can't do well or improve as a solo. When you're playing solo, the best thing to take away from that and improve on, again, is just becoming a player that can do whatever, whenever it's required in any given moment. Sometimes you might need to be the shotgunner of the team. Sometimes you might need to be the sniper of the team. Sometimes you might need to use a hand cannon because your team is lacking some team shot ability or DPS. Sometimes you're gonna have to be that more Slayer heavy player, and sometimes you should take a back seat and be a little bit more of a support to your team. And sometimes these roles you'll have to fill in terms of your style of play might have to change in just a moment's notice. So sometimes you might have to support a teammate, but then switch gears and instantly become a Slayer and get a 2-piece to enable that you win the round or something like that. Sometimes you might need to be the player that plays the objective and stays on the zone, when other times you might need to be someone that pushes up and stops them from pushing whoever's on the zone and slay a little bit more. You need to get really good at reading your teammates and what they're looking to do and respond as the player to fill the other role or fill another role that's necessary. You want to learn to be a player that can fit in and plug into literally any scenario and be confident in that position, rather than being a player that just sticks to what they're comfortable with and tries to see results and hope it works out. I think it's far more effective and far better for improvement for you to be ready to be whatever the team may need in the moments rather than just sticking to what's comfortable all the time. Rule number 2, assume you need to be perfect. I think this ties in well with the previous rule or point, but when you're solo queuing, don't blame teammates. Be prepared to be the person that needs to be perfect. Assume you need to be the best player all the time with no flaws and be a perfect player. Of course, you're not going to obviously be able to achieve that. Being perfect is not possible, but it's the mentality I think you should be going in with. This means that you're going to have to be the player that makes clutch plays or is there to support the team, doesn't throw away their life, meaning you need to be valuing your life incredibly. You can't afford to die, but at the same time, you're not in the back of the map. You're gonna have to engage at times where you don't want to because you need to keep your teammates alive and be there for them, and sometimes you'll need to team shoot, but other times you'll have to get the pick to get the momentum going and then still push with your team. You have to play around your teammates and assume it's up to you to make everything happen or not fall apart completely. This also means, like I said, don't blame your teammates. You're gonna get teammates that aren't great sometimes, and other times you might be the teammate that didn't perform so hot. It doesn't matter. The point here is that you need to assume that you need to be the most versatile player possible for your team, the most fluid player, and you need to be the perfect player. Like I said, you're not going to be actually able to be perfect all the time, but it's the mentality I think that you should be going in with, giving yourself a high bar and being critical about everything rather than blaming scenarios or losses on external factors you can't control. I think part of being a perfect player is being hypercritical about every little thing that you could have controlled. Did you miss shots in a specific scenario that could have turned the tides? Did you not play your life enough? Did you take unnecessary damage in a scenario? Were you not there when a teammate was engaged? Assume that you had an impact on every single scenario potentially and be hypercritical about that for yourself. Personally, I think this goes a longer way in terms of your improvement and just not getting upset all the time over your teammates or external factors that you couldn't control. This allows you to really think to yourself about how you could have influenced the game and become better as a player, and then of course how you could have affected the outcome rather than, thinking that it was an external source's fault entirely. This once again ties into my next rule, which is maintain a good mental state. I'm a pretty firm believer that FPS games are so much so about your mental state. This means keeping your head in the game and always thinking about the task at hand, but more importantly, not tilting, of course. Part of playing solo is understanding that there are going to be so many things that you can't control, despite being a perfect player. But that shouldn't deter you from being as critical as possible in every scenario as to what you could have done to affect it differently. Sometimes you're gonna lose those games where you felt you did play perfectly or you played out of your mind, and sometimes you're gonna feel teams aren't balanced, or you might face a full team as a solo with other solos. It's important to understand, I think, that these are things that you can't control, and as soon as you accept that as a part of solo queuing and just the nature of solo queue and not let that affect your mental state, you can keep focused and keep making plays to win and probably have a little bit more fun despite any sort of odds. Focusing on or dwelling on these unfavorable things that you can't control will throw you off and inhibit your ability to perform your best in every circumstance. I think the best thing to do at all times, perhaps if you're feeling a little bit upset, nervous, or in your head about your performance or ability at the time, is to constantly ask yourself, what's the next action? What do I need to do to win? When I'm playing with my team or my friends, or even as a solo, there are times where I get nervous, where I get down on myself, where I get upset at certain circumstances. And to refocus myself and get myself back on track, I ask myself or ask my team, if we're collectively feeling like this, what's the next action? What do I need to do to win? I find personally it's the perfect way to just get yourself back into the moment and your moment-to-moment thinking and look at and focus on the task at hand. Whatever's next immediately in front of you, what is the next immediate action? What needs to be done to win? Again, for me, it takes my focus away from things that I don't need to be concerned with and back into the game and focusing on the task at hand, and allows you to enter a sort of quote-unquote flow state, as people call it, I find. My next rule is be committed to improvement and not attached to loot. The new Trials rework is eons better for rewarding players for their time than before, simply for winning rounds. It's a great thing to realize that flawless isn't the be-all and end-all, and you can spend time playing Trials and improving even as a solo player and get some good stuff out of it without going flawless. I think focusing on your personal play and things you can control, like I said in this video, being a versatile, perfect player for every team scenario and maintaining a great mental game will allow you to not only stay focused on the immediate result or the immediate task, but also have a better time as a solo and allow yourself to improve on things that will go a long way anywhere in the Crucible. Remember that good play and mastering the things you can control, maintaining a good mental state, will inevitably result in good loot and flawless at some point, even if it feels impossible right now. Good play and mastery comes first, and improving on that comes first, and the results, loot or flawless, will certainly follow. Dwelling and focusing, making your entire play about the loot and getting loot or getting flawless is only going to deter you from your focus in game, or perhaps set an expectation, and when you may not fulfill that, it's gonna deter your enjoyment, I think. Goals are really important, and it's what'll drive you to do all these things. But being attached to that is not great for maintaining focus and a good mental state. On a side note, if you are focusing on that improvement, I think recording some games and looking over your films is something I can strongly suggest to accelerate your improvement, as you'll be able to identify some blind spots that you weren't able to in the heat of a match to improve on. I think my last major point is something that can be applied to all of the Crucible and PvP, and that's utilize the radar. Whether that means effectively reading it, baiting the radar, or even manipulating it given the right class, I'd say this is such an important thing at the core fundamental of PvP that you have to do. Your radar gives an absurd amount of information, but it's not just there to be generally where your enemy is or give you an idea. It has your teammates there, and sometimes paying attention to your teammates a little bit more can be the difference maker. It gives you very specific detailed location of your teammates, so you know how you can position yourself best to work with them and know when they have your cover. This is really important to keep cognizant of. But radar reading basics and fundamentals are still important too. Being able to tell whether an enemy is on top of you or below you with the radar is important, and where they might generally be trying to engage you from, and making educated predictions of where they might be dependent on where the radar is pinging is quite valuable too. But remember, the radar is a tool to use as bait as well, where you can do things like stand at the very outer perimeter of the inner pie of the radar to make it seem like you're closer to an enemy, and hopefully bait them to slide out and shotgun you while you're actually well out of their shotgun's range. Don't over-rely on the information your radar gives you from where the enemies are though. I think really paying attention to where your teammates are and how to coordinate around them and their positioning is probably the most important, because if you do have someone that's trying to manipulate your radar with some of the classes you can do that with in the game, you won't fall victim to that quite as much if you're really just basing your positioning and your logic of where the enemies could be off of where your teammates are. So try and think of that as well. Those are all my rules and tips for solo queuing. I wish you the best of luck in your matches and your loot. Take it easy.